So welcome to the AT Construction Podcast, and today we have Tyler Grace with us, who is owner of TRG Home Concepts, and most of you know him as one of the hosts on the Modern Craftsman. So welcome, Tyler.
You could call me the president.
I do like the president. That has a better ring to it than just owner.
It sounds official, right?
I'm going to start calling you the president of the Modern Craftsman. That way Nick and John
That's
know
fine.
what's up.
You just have to ask Nick. He might get offended.
Well, it's interesting. So, I mean, Tyler, with you, I've been wanting to have you on for a long time because your business model is so much different than mine or Nick's, right? And even Johnny, like you just have a different operation, which has always fascinated me because the work you put out, the quality is outstanding, and you're doing most of it yourself. I mean, you're managing the business development, you're managing client, and you're self-performing. So it's super unique. So when you're on a project, what scopes of work do you typically self-perform?
Well, thank you, first off. I try and self-perform as much as I can. There's a lot. I mean, I feel like I kind of got into the business model just because it worked for me and didn't really understand how I could maximize my profits doing it. And it was just easier. It was simpler. I didn't have scheduling issues, but then I also wanted to execute at a high level. And I was finding with subs and everything else to manage subs is a job in and of itself. So a lot of times for me, the scale that I'm doing business, it's easier to self-perform as many trades as I can legally do. So on a typical job for us, we're self-performing everything from demolition, rough framing, layout, insulation if it's a small job, drywall, finishing, painting, carpentry, tile, basically everything that we're legally allowed to do. We don't do finish in place hardwood floors, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, roofing, siding, exterior work. We typically sub out, but I try and self-perform most interior trades.
It's interesting. So why not the hardwood flooring? If you're already doing the tile and you're doing a lot of the finished carpentry, is there a reason that you said, hey, I don't want to touch the finished hardwood floor?
Yeah, so specialty tools. I think that there's a big learning curve. It's hard work. And I think it's one of those things, it's almost like paint finishing that I think that you could dive pretty deeply into it. And I don't want to do that. Like I considered it because of a few issues with flooring subs, and it was just to say, I'll just do it myself. And then when I really started looking into it, I was like, I don't want to open this can of worms. I have to draw the line somewhere.
Well, as you mentioned, paint, I mean, I've seen you do like a high gloss finish. I mean, you did at that entertainment center, and anyone that's worked on a level 5 or a high gloss, I mean, it is extremely difficult, to execute that at a high level. And so, as you mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of coordination and technique and practice, if you will, to be able to paint at that level.
Yeah, so I started finishing cabinets because I had a lot of cabinets get ruined, which was probably partially my fault, hiring painters, not screening them well enough. But it got to the point where, do I look to bring cabinets that I've made or built-ins to a cabinet shop for somebody to finish them and then bring them back, install them, touch up in the field, which wasn't ideal. So I started finishing cabinets myself, and then, I have high standards for myself, for my subs, and I also I don't enjoy doing things that I don't understand. So anything that I do, I'm 110% into. It's either I don't do it or it's gas on or gas off.
Yeah.
So I just learned, and I learned one job at a time, and I learned by screwing a lot of stuff up, and I've gotten decent. Like I know my capacity, and I know my limits and where I should draw the line, but it just comes down to, for me, it's easier to manage that aspect of things than it is to have a sub there and have to check in on them and then have to have them clean things up, touch things up, make sure it's good with the homeowner. And then if I don't have 3 jobs going on at once, where do I go while I have a painter there? I'm like, just go to the beach, put my feet up. So with the scale that I do things, it makes sense for me to plant myself there and not leave and not get subs in, and all the money goes in my pocket at that point. but that also limits the size of job I can do.
Right. And I understand that. Like I like that approach in the sense that you have a lot more control. You know, it's a better hands-on, it's a better experience. You know, as you mentioned, instead of subbing out everything, you have, we'll just call it profit lines or opportunity in each of these scopes of work. But where I find this incredibly complex is I look at it for us as a supervision company and where we have superintendents, right? When they're in the field and they have their tools on and they're doing punch, like they're not able to be on their computer. They're not able to, you know, process paperwork or emails, whatever it may be. And so I'm fascinated for you, Tyler, when you're working on a project, how do you find time? Because when you have your tool bags on, you can't just have your phone on. So how are you managing just running the business? Because you're trying to run the business and you're self-performing.
Yeah, so I think that all of the reason why I'm in this little niche, for lack of a better term, is it's a lot of natural progression and kind of I've wound up funneling myself into this over the years. I was just telling a larger painting contractor yesterday how I'll anticipate getting the job and I'm going to get people set up and then I'm going to hop on my computer for a couple hours. And as soon as I get to the job and the tools are in my hand, I don't get to the computer. So for a long time, I did it after work, which it got to the point with kids and my wife working that I couldn't do that anymore. So I've found a way to scale back business enough that I do a handful of jobs a year. I have managed to keep my overhead extremely low, while still, you know, I invest in nice tools, I invest in new vehicles, things to make my life easier to look professional. But it also lowers my overhead. I have less mistakes. I'm not doing things 2 and 3 times. The communication is with me and the customer. I'm not depending on somebody else. It's with me and the subcontractors. So I've been able to scale back enough that if I take a day off the job or if I need to get to the job late, it's pretty easy to manage that. And then while I'm on the job, it's just all work. I'm dealing with setting things up for 2 weeks ahead, 3 weeks ahead, kind of while I'm working. While, you know, I usually meet with my customers in the morning and then at the end of the day to go over where things are and make selections. And we're doing a lot of pre-planning too. So usually once we start the job, the communication is more so just ensuring that the customers are on the same page as me, or if we run into an issue. But a lot of times at that point, there's enough trust there that I can just kind of get let loose. And it's pretty easy. I'm painting by numbers at that point. So I'm planning for jobs 6 months ahead, 9 months ahead, kind of behind the curtains. And then once we start those jobs, everything's pretty much selected, and we have a pretty good comprehensive design in place that I don't need to do too much for those jobs when they're actually happening.
It's interesting. So if I understand correctly, it's not so much where you're saying, hey, Monday through Thursday I'm in the field, Friday I'm in the office. It's a case by case, day by day, depending on the project. And you've built yourself not only a reputation, but at least with your skill set, with who you know in these projects, you could take on the projects that make sense, that you can handle and control that duration and still have the time needed for the client or for design or emails or whatever it may be for the back end stuff.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's kind of progressed that way very organically. It wasn't always that way, and I didn't always have the customer base or the confidence to do that, or even just the confidence to have that relationship with the customer, right? Where now I've really tried to work only for customers who want us to do the work. So they're coming to us saying, like, I have to offer them something more than a dollar sign. Whatever I'm bringing to the table has to be more valuable than whoever's going to come at a lower price than me. So they're hiring me, understanding what I do, the quality, the process, the design. So I don't have a lot of customers who are very needy or want to make every decision with us. So I don't have, like on a larger job like you, right? You don't have a lot of selections made, or you need the designer to pick a fixture, then you need your super to understand where that is. He then needs to get, or she needs to get those specs to your electrician or your plumber, for me, that's all on me. It's face to face with the customers every day. I don't have to worry about communicating all of that stuff. A lot of it's chosen, selected, budgeted, laid out for beforehand. So it's front loaded in design. It's front loaded at the rough ends, and then after that, I don't have a lot of time with the customer on a daily basis going through things and making selections and layouts. So once we're through rough inspections, if I need to devote time during the day or after work for a little bit for the next job or the next two jobs, I have the ability to do that because I'm kind of just going through the motions on the job at that point. Everything's already accounted for. All the brain work's done. The subs are out of there. So it's just me and whoever's working for me kind of, like I said, painting by numbers at that point. All the thoughts done.
It's interesting because the advantage there, Tyler, as you mentioned, I mean, because the communication's all through you, you're not playing this telephone game where you're interpreting something, you're handing it off all these different channels and it gets lost in translation, right? And so you know the scope, you know the project, and so there's less mistakes is really what it comes down to. But from a selection side, are you working with the client direct on design? I mean, how are you making those selections? And even more, like if I'm a client reaching out to you, Tyler, and I want a price for you to remodel my house, are you setting allowance lines for certain things? I mean, how does that design, when, and how does it take place?
So it's case by case, but a lot of times the way it works for me is I have a customer come to me and you have to remember also the scopes of my jobs are much smaller. So
right.
it's very manageable. You know, I have a spreadsheet with everything that can go into every one of these jobs. And it's pretty easy to spend the time up front designing. And if it's a bathroom, you know, we can choose that we want sconces. We can choose an approximate size. If a customer can't make a selection before it's in the space, say, let's pick 2 or 3 options that you want. And then we can lay that out, block in that wall, set up so the electrician leaves us slack so that whatever that final decision is, we can kind of audible. And I'm the keeper of all that information. So I don't have to worry about, I do have to worry about forgetting something or not planning or accounting for it, but I've done it enough at this point that I kind of have a process in place that allows us the liberty to move ahead with design if those decisions aren't made. Most of the time, a lot of the selections, the decisions, the trim packages are all accounted for beforehand. And we usually have, if it's an allowance, it's like countertop allowance because we don't know exactly how many square feet or their selection. But a lot of times with fixtures and all that stuff, I need that prior to rough in. Mm-hmm. So there's no reason why we can't have that selected prior to the job starting. Because if it's prior to rough in, it's the same thing. The customer, we may see that space framed in, but the customer doesn't see that finished space. So we should be able to either give them renderings, mock-ups showing those selections so those decisions can all be made beforehand and I can account for them. So if we need to hand that off to a designer, I also have a lot of my vendors. I can set the customers up to go walk through the showroom with the vendors and make selections. My vendors typically know style at that point. I can send them floor plans. I can send them inspiration, budgeted allowances for them. And also my wife ends up helping a lot on finish selection because she enjoys that. I don't enjoy that end of it. So for me, it's easy. If it's a customer where it's like, hey, we need to spend a weekend and go to the tile store, go to the countertop supplier, go pick cap, anything like that, we can allocate a couple days towards that. That it's not that hard to do for me and on the scale and the scope of my jobs.
And do you build, I call it elbow space, right? You build an elbow room when you look at costing and profitability. So when your wife's involved in design, is that under the TRG? Are you billing for her? Is that just a service you're giving the client?
Usually I have a design fee based up front, budgeted. So a lot of times people will hire us and it's almost like a pre-construction, right? Mm-hmm. Or somebody's going to hire us and we're going to try and nail down design. I'll allocate a certain amount of hours. And the reason I do that is because if we get hung up, if the customer's a pain in the butt, if they can't make decisions, I'm going to say, hey, we're going to budget 12 hours of design towards this and site meetings, and we'll track that. And if they go over it 2 hours, no big deal. If it's one of those customers where we're at 24 hours, yeah. Like at some point I need them to kind of shit or get off the pot. And if they're paying for it, a lot of times they'll make decisions much quicker. So I tend to get compensated for design time. If there's a designer involved, it's specifically, hey, this is their hourly rate. This is how many we're budgeting. If it goes over, it'll be this per hour. Again, it's case by case. A lot of my customers are return customers now. So it's like, hey, give me a deposit for the job. We'll sort all this out as we go. And the trust is there that I don't need to. I'll still provide them with the spreadsheet of costs, but they're not so concerned like, hey, what if we do this? What if we do that? They understand that it's going to be fair and they're going to get their money's worth.
Yeah, which is really nice. I mean, the repeat clients, especially for your business, Tyler, I mean, I can see where that does create it so much easier on phase 2, 3, 4 as you work down the line. But my curiosity too is when, the question often asked in our industry is, okay, so if I'm calling you, Tyler, to come out and do my remodel, and, you're forecasting your schedule, you're forecasting what you have on your plate, but at some point you can't just drive around all day and do bids. You can't just drive around and meet. So that vetting, are you charging the client? Like if they were a cold call to come visit them, are you charging them for that consultation fee? Are you vetting them over the phone? I mean, how do you work through that process to know, yes, this may be a project for me, so I'm willing to put in, that time necessary to win the project?
A judgment call. So I'll send people, if it's a call, I'll send them to my website and they'll fill out a form. It'll ask a few questions. Realistically, I try and get people's addresses, and I'll look up the value of their home, because I understand from my price point that somebody's not going to put $100,000 kitchen into a house that's worth $300,000. And I really wouldn't want somebody to do that, because it's setting me up for them to be disappointed, because they're never going to get that out. So a lot of times I'll look up the person. Who's a person? What do they do for a living? Where do they live? And I'll see if it makes sense. And then I check schedule-wise, because I'm always booked up. I'm easily booked up a year in advance at any given time. And that's been the case for the past 5-6 years. And that's without a return customer coming to me saying, hey, let's do this, where I have to kind of squeeze them in. So the vetting is a lot of it's a judgment call. It's getting on the phone with them. It's seeing if they have a design already, because if they don't, it's tough. I also, within the past year and a half, I've really started telling customers pretty straightforward that we're not bidding projects.
So if they're asking you saying, hey, Tyler, I want to get 3 bids, or I'm telling these 3 companies, I mean, it's like, no, either, I'm Tyler, or it's correct. Negotiated, right?
Yeah, because I've just found over the years, even if we're going to be competitive with pricing, I just selfishly find myself enjoying the jobs where the people come to me and say, we want you to do the work, because they enjoy that process much more. They enjoy investing in us, investing in their home, and then seeing the fruits of all of our labor kind of at the end of the job. They're coming to us, and I want to work for them. They're trusting us. And for me, that's so much more enjoyable than somebody who's saying, we kind of like your work, but we're not sure if we like it as much as this person or this person's price, where there's a handful of people on the table. So if I have enough people who can come to me in any given year that just want me to do the job, and it's not regardless of price, but when price, they understand they're going to pay a premium and they trust us enough, I would want to work for those people all day long. And I've kind of established this small enough niche in this low enough volume of work that I can make a living, that I don't need to competitively bid jobs. So it's not always a hard no, but usually it just doesn't make that much sense for me, because I don't have the time to do that either.
See, and I think that's, between you and I, that's one of the biggest things that plagues our industry, in my opinion, is that there's this mentality, right, that the client has to go out and they have to hard bid and get all these bids. But the reality is, as you and I know, there's so much left to interpretation. Even if you have specs and plans, interpretation, quality, if some contractors want to cut corners or nickel and dime them later, I mean, and so even if they get multiple bids, it still doesn't get the client a true understanding what that is. I mean, I struggle with that. I could have 3 concrete guys bid a job, and they're all going to exclude and include different things. And, I have to be a professional, go through and really dissect that and make sure I understand that. So, but the biggest thing I think most of us struggle with, how do you handle that conversation? Because if I'm calling saying, hey, Tyler, I'm going to have you bid this, I'm having 2 other bids. I mean, how do you let off the client, or how do you handle that communication to say, this isn't for me, I don't hard bid, without offending them? Or is it even an issue of concern?
I think early on it was because you don't want to potentially tell somebody no. In the back of your head, you say, well, what if this job turns into something else, or their friend, or they go and tell, and you just have to believe that things are going to work out. That I don't try and force anything in business. I feel that my business is going to take the path that's best for my business, for myself, for my family. And I could manipulate things, and I could really force things and tweak things. But if I just let it happen the way that it's supposed to, I can't, if it doesn't work out, I can't be bitter about it because I didn't force it. It wasn't a decision that I made where I'm like, I'm going to expand and have 2 crews and then I lose a bunch of money. It just doesn't happen that way. So I've come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to be able to please everyone. I'm not going to be able to get to everyone. And if somebody gets upset that I don't competitively bid a project and they don't turn around and say, hey, you know what? We're okay with that, let's move ahead, then I don't think that they really want me to do the work. They want me to give them a price.
Right.
And if I fit whatever their agenda, whatever their program is, if I fit into that program at that point, I have a shot at the job. But that I don't want to position myself to do that, because there are plenty of customers out there, and it takes work on my end, but there's plenty of customers out there who come to me and just say, hey, we've seen what you've done. We were in our neighbor's house. We saw on Instagram, we walked a job, we had dinner at a friend's house, and we saw what you did, and we want you to do the job. And they trust us enough that they'll hire us without, we're going to provide them budgeting, and we're going to be realistic, and we're going to tell them that we're probably going to be more expensive. But the people who go through all that and still want to hire us will wait for us. They'll pay our premium, and they'll appreciate what we do. So that makes the most amount of sense to me. Getting, somebody getting upset that I don't want to competitively bid a job is just nothing. I can't worry about that. I don't need the volume of work to keep everyone happy.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard it said that well, Tyler. I mean, you said that spot on, that the reality is if the client is looking for just a hard bid, you may not even be, I don't want to say qualified, but they're not the right person for the job, because they're looking for this small parameter, whatever it may be, and you're not going to try to guess to be in there because there's value you bring, and the clients understand that. They're going to bring on Tyler, right? And it's interesting because I've had other GCs, their process is, well, if I'm in a hard bid something, it's 10 grand, right, for a hard bid or whatever that number is. But, this all comes down to value, and I've seen some other successful contractors I've networked with, and I'm going to speak about on my scale, which is a little bit different, from what you and I do, being that I don't self-perform, but when a client comes in and they say, hey, Brad, I want you to hard bid this house. Well, if I show them the value of saying, okay, this is how I bid a project, I'm not just getting the cheapest price or 3 bids. Like, we're going to go through, we're going to analyze these plans. We're going to go through Bluebeam. We're going to write the scope. We're going to diagnose this entire set. And so this isn't so much as just a quick, turnkey number. This is weeks and weeks of data entry and scope definition and processes and estimation that we're doing internally. So this is a cost, right? I'm going to spend whatever, 100 hours. It's going to cost me 10 grand. Well, when you present it that way, the client understands, okay, this isn't just some, they're serious about it. And so there is a value to that. And as you direct clients to that value, then they understand that more.
Yeah. And this is kind of all been a realization the further that I've grown in my self-growth, my business growth, my skill set, corresponding with customers, everything else. But I've just realized that if you put a number on something up front, like you said, it's never going to be apples to apples, no matter what. If you said, build me a cabinet, and you go to 3 different people, that cabinet's going to be completely different. Even if there's a plan in place, people's construction methods are going to be different. It may take somebody 3 times longer than somebody else. If you haven't seen that product firsthand, experienced that process firsthand, it's not fair to make a judgment or make a selection based on a price if you don't know what goes into it. So for me, it's even price aside, I want to make sure that my customers understand who we are, what we do. A lot of times I say, let me get you into one of my customers' houses that we worked on to see what our finished product looks like 2 years after it's been there, and to speak with the customer firsthand about their experience. And it can be a handful of customers. I don't have to send you to my best customers. There's customers who say, hey, it's a long wait. Is that worth it to you? Because some people, it doesn't matter how good of a price we are. If you want it now, I can't do anything about it because I don't have manpower to throw at the job. So price point to me, it's really tough because our industry is extremely price driven. It comes down to materials. It comes down to subs, contractors. Everything's about price, and it's not necessarily the lowest price. It could be the middle price, or you could choose somebody because they're the most expensive and their work may not reflect that. So for me, you really have to do your due diligence. You have to do your homework. You have to go look at jobs. You're spending how much money on a house? If you were to go buy a car, how many cars would you go sit in? You'd do your homework. You'd go see it firsthand, drive it, feel it. If you're going to go to a doctor, are you going to be like, and I know it's different. We're not fixing people, but at the same time, like if you were going to a doctor, you had a health issue, would your first concern be like, this guy's half the price of the other guy? It just doesn't make that much sense to me. And I can't control the whole industry. I would love to make things change and have this massive impact on this entire industry. That's not within my capacity. What's within my capacity is to control the impact I have on my life and my business and my customers. And I never want to sell a job based on price. I never do. I want to sell a job based on what we do, our execution, our process, our design, our cleanliness, our control. And when I do that, if the budget fits, then it's a good customer. But I don't want to sell a job based on a price ever.
I love that. And, I will say that there is a big impact you're making, Tyler. I mean, all the information you're putting out there, and it's funny, that analogy, I've heard you give that before as far as being a doctor trying to diagnose an entire project, right? And that's really what we're trying to deal with in construction when you're diagnosing a project. And it's interesting, when you're speaking about price, I had Matt Reisinger on, who you know, and Matt gave an example early in his career. He was bidding, and is really one of the last times he had hard bid a project, because he's similar to you and I, where it's negotiated. And he said he was with the client and they had 3 bids. They had a low, medium, high, and he was medium. And the only reason the client selected him, which he found out after the fact, was because the only difference between him and the high guy was their cabinet number. And the upper guy had selected a cabinet company in town that he knew that was more of a furniture-based cabinet company, really custom cabinetry. And he picked a company that had built their own boxes, but they bought doors from like Caldor, right? So you're talking one scope of item, just that's it. They end up hiring Matt. And then later on in the project, they ended up going up and using that furniture cabinet company. So he said, it just, there's no rhyme or reason, because they picked me for this reason. And come to find out, we use that same cabinet company in the long run.
Yeah, it doesn't. When I first started out, it's funny because I think so much of it is just, it's on the consumer end of things. And I think that most contractors are trying to appease to what the consumer wants, right? And they think that the consumer wants the best price, and they want the most for that dollar. And that's just what's been burned into our brains. When I first started, I thought that I had to come in, I had to have the lowest price to get the job. And that's how I kind of built my business. And I knew where numbers were. I knew when I wouldn't get a job. And my biggest concern starting in this industry was ensuring that my price was good and that I wasn't going to be expensive. And I just realized that that's not sustainable for us. And if you want to be able to sustain a career in this industry, that you have to find an alternate means of making a living. And for me, that's not it. I don't want to do volume. I don't want to manage people. That's not my expertise. That doesn't make me happy. I want to manage my customers. I want to manage design. I want to manage the work. And I want to find a way to maximize the amount of money that I can make while executing at the level that I do. And I've just found that the number there is going to limit what I can do so much. And I think that, again, there's customers who aren't so concerned about that. Everyone cares about money and how much things cost. And I'm not saying I'm going to be 200% higher than the other guy, but I know that it's going to take us more time to do a job. And the more time you spend, you should be compensated for that. So a lot of times that's something else I do is I show customers schedule, how long this is going to take, because to execute at a higher level, to clean up every day, to take time and lay things out, it does take more time. And if people are willing to pay for that, if you give them that opportunity. But I think so many people in our industry, they don't want to give people the opportunity to do it right. They think that they just want the cheapest price.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. I mean, you talked about what we anticipate the consumer wanting, and that's really Steve Jobs, right? With Apple, he said, I'm going to dictate to the customer what they want, not vice versa. And in essence, that's what you're doing, because as we found out, any successful company is ones that, hey, it's not just the cheapest price. It's what's the other value compensation, right? It's communication, it's quality, it's, processes, all these things that the customer does want. Someone who's reliable. Hey, I had Tyler, he's on my house. He's hands-on, right? I call him, he's available. This is who I'm dealing with direct. And so there's this assurance. And, this is built over time, right? There's a confidence that you have, Tyler, that's made you successful, that has made your business successful. So is that confidence? Is that just from trial and error? Is that from mistakes? Is that networking? I mean, how have you accelerated that growth and knowledge and confidence to where you are at today?
I would say one of the biggest factors there. So coming into this, I would say I was at a point in my life that I didn't have super high self-esteem. I didn't know where I wanted to be, what I wanted to be doing. I started my own company because I didn't want to go work in an office. I didn't want a commercial construction job. So it was like, I could do this and kind of get by, and I didn't have grand plans for it. But the more that I did this, and then the more that I put myself out there, and putting yourself out there on the internet is one thing, because you're going to have this fan base that kind of patronizes you. And this isn't to speak down on people who always support me, but I feel like a lot of times it's just people blowing smoke up your ass. And to let that get you up on your high horse is one thing. But what really changed it for me is going and walking other people's jobs, where you go onto a job and it's a $6 million build. It's an $8 million build. This took 2-3 years, and looking at the level of execution and the standard there, and seeing what our work looks like compared to that was, for me, because I never thought, I'm not on that level, right? I can't do what those guys are doing. I don't have the budget for it. And maybe I don't, but like at the scale that I choose to be, I do have the budget to do that. And our level of execution, I'd put up against any of these people running these big ticket jobs, because it's so easy for me to control that on the scale that we do. And really walking jobs and seeing what other people are getting away with, what their customers are happy with, what their standard is, what their definition of quality is, and then seeing what I'm doing gave me a huge amount of confidence to walk into customers' homes, or, hey, we're looking, it's between you and so who's been in business for 35 years, and I know their work, but I've walked one of their jobs, and now I can say, hey, you know what? They're a great option. Price point may be comparable, maybe we're a little bit more, but I've seen their work in person, and what we do is completely different than what they do. And that, for me, was really, I think, what kind of lit the fire under me to say, hey, what I'm putting out is truly different. And that's not to be arrogant. That's not to say that nobody else can do what we're doing. I just think that I positioned myself in this little niche with an ability to manage and self-perform so many things that when you get to a bigger scale, it's very difficult or impossible to hit our level of communication and execution just because there's so many hands involved.
Yeah, and I would agree to that. I mean, when you think level of communication, execution, it is tough because even on an expensive home, it still comes down to how good your trim guy, how good your painter, right? How good is your tile guy? And if Tyler, you're executing at the same level or better than these guys, it doesn't matter the value of the home. But I think the important thing is here when you start speaking about confidence, yes, there's value to Tyler going and walking these projects to really compare, right? Almost like you're sizing someone up in basketball or football or something. I mean, hey, I can play at this level or I can compete at this level. And by seeing that, there's going to be a confidence as you're now working on your business development strategies with your client. But, the other point I want to make is that when I started my career out of college, I worked for it's a production builder. I mean, they did nicer production, but their level of quality, what they asked of us was really high for a production company, right? And I feel that set the tone that you can still take that level of detail or eye or execution to the higher homes and make sure you're demanding that. And so essentially that's what you've done is say, hey, I still have my niche here. I still have my market, but I can still deliver a high quality project. It doesn't have to be the client spending $8 million.
No, and I understand. I also have the conversations, right? So my customers come to me now and people have more money and they're in bigger homes and they want me to do bigger projects. And I have to have the conversation with them that I'll be able to self-perform a certain amount of these trades and I'm going to have to subcontract other trades out. And I'll manage them and manage that job to the best of my ability, but it's not going to be me doing that entire project, right? So I'm more impressed by people, because it's just not what I do and it's not what I want to do, people who can execute on a very high level while doing a large scale or a large volume or even just high dollar jobs. Because for me, my head would spin, right? With one or two jobs going on and then a few jobs lined up down the road, trying to coordinate all of that, it's a lot. There's a lot of balls in the air, right? And for somebody who can do that on a larger volume and communicate and keep all of those ducks in a row, for me, that's impressive. And I know that that's not my strong suit. That's not what I want to do. That's not what makes me happy. I don't want to manage people and then stroke them the right way. And when they make a mistake, how do I groom them and talk to them in a way that I'm firm and they understand my standard, but I'm not that much of a dick that they still want to work for me. And I'm like, it's just easier for me to do the work, right? Like, it's tough to manage all those personalities, and people who do that well, for me, that's a talent. That's something that I find incredible and amazing. And I understand that that's not me. That's not what I'm good at. So I'm not going to try and take that route and grow to that route where I think that I would be doing a disservice to me, my family, and my customers.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, managing people is definitely a challenge, especially as you think employees, right? Employees can be a challenge to manage, not only them, but also, all the subcontractors. But, you mentioned any successful company, Tyler, they're going to understand their strengths, right? They're going to understand what they're good at, and they really have to strive to make sure that everything fits that channel. So going back to the schedule, this is something that I'm super curious about because you're similar to Kyle with our buildings where your schedule's out a year in advance and you have your clientele, you're self-performing, right? So how do you manage that schedule part? Because if you have the next year planned out, and let's say it's 6 jobs for easy math every 2 months, and you have a project that either speeds up or takes a little bit longer.
They never speed up.
I know they never speed up. I mean, it's just the reality. We know they're not speeding up. And so trying to get materials, supplies, labor that always takes longer. You think it's going to take 8 hours, takes 16. I mean, this is par for the course for anyone that's even done work on their house. They know how long it takes. So how do you manage that aspect, even the filling the pipeline to say, hey, client X, yeah, I could do your job, but it's going to be 14 months from now?
It's just as anything else that I do, I have that conversation with them. My schedule is very fluid. I try to work 1.5, 2 jobs at a time where I'm going from one to the other. It's, as I'm sure you know, it's very difficult to execute at a high level when you have multiple things going on and when you're spread across the plate. So for me to be able to do what I do, I need to plant myself somewhere. I need to manage that job. I need to have my tool belt on, and I can do some other things, but I really need to stay there. So my conversation with the customers, it goes back to, why are you hiring us? Are you hiring us because I'm going to turn your job around in 3 months? Then I'm setting myself up for failure. You're going to hate me. You're going to hate the experience. You're going to be so frustrated because it got bumped and it got bumped and we didn't start when we said we were going to, and then the job took longer than anticipated, because that's just the structure of my business. So if I'm going to sell somebody that, yeah, we're going to turn your job, we'll be done within the year. We'll start at the 10-month mark and we'll be done. I'm shooting myself in the foot before I start that project. So I have that conversation with customers. These are the jobs that are ahead of you. If you sign up, you put a deposit for this job to start working on the design in 6 months from now, and this is our targeted start date, you'll be next in line. If I have a customer who comes to me before I have a deposit in hand and wants to sign up for me, they're next in that spot. So if you're serious about doing the work, you have to give me a deposit. We have to get on your schedule. And I'm not using that money. That's just that's incentive and motivation for me to put the effort into that customer, and for that customer to kind of marry us at that point. Everyone has skin in the game, but it's basically, these are the jobs that are ahead of you. I don't necessarily know what's going to go on with them. I don't have manpower to throw at jobs when things go wrong. So we're not necessarily picking up on the schedule end, but you're not hiring me to be able to turn this job around quickly. Once I start your job, I'm on your job. So contractually, when you sign a work contract, you need a proposed start date, right? So I have basically a preliminary contract to sign up for the job, and then we're signing that final work contract closer to prior to commencement of the work. So when I have a very realistic start date, I can then sign a work contract with them as to when that's going to be and take that bigger deposit at that point. But again, I don't want to shoot myself in the foot. So I just tell customers, understand that it's a fluid schedule. I just had a customer who I probably spent 9 months at their house over the course of the past 2 years, and they just want me there to do the rest of the house. And it's not fair to my other customers who want us there. So they wanted like a screened-in porch addition put off the back of their house. And it's not really up our alley, but she's very particular. She loves working with us. Not the easiest customer, but she wants us to do the work, right? She knows what she wants. And I had the conversation with her. I don't know when I can get to you. I've spent 9 months at your house. It's time for me to get to other customers. It would be a minimum a year. And she didn't want to hear that. So she said, I think what makes the most sense is for us to find somebody else, start getting estimates, and then we'll wait for you to do the interior work when it's more up your alley anyway. And I said, yeah, I think that's a really good idea. 2 weeks later, I hear back from her. So when do you think you could do the screened-in porch? And and that's the same thing where, you even talk about confidence. And I'm obviously doing something that these people want me. And I haven't given her a price for the job. I've worked for them before, and I see their experience, and I see how happy they are and what we're doing, and I hear horror stories. And that, for me, gives me more confidence to continue to run things the way I am, to be able to raise my prices, to be able to command a premium, because I've given somebody the news that they didn't want to hear. I told them, find somebody else. They were good with that, and then they still want to come back to me, and they still want to wait outside of when they wanted to do this. So at that point, it's like, I don't know, can I just call my price? Like, I'm not going to rip people off, but if you're willing to wait for me that long, it's not what you want, it's not even the job that's right up our alley, then I'm doing something right in the way that I'm structuring myself.
Yeah, you are, because there's value in the word no, and for you to be able to have that confidence and at least set that clear expectation, because this is our life, this is our reality. To be successful in our business, which is really difficult, is to set clear and finite expectations with the client. And yes, we're going to miss things, especially at pre-construction of the sales meeting and even during construction. But the more that we can hit on the expectation side, right, the more happy the client will be. And, so I have two questions along that side. When you had mentioned that you have this pipeline, and you alluded to this. So if I'm hiring you, Tyler, and I'm going to be 8 months out, and I know that we have a projected start date, that's going to go into February of next year. Okay, so am I paying you a deposit to hold my place in line? And in addition to that, how often are you updating me over 8 months, right, till February to say, hey, we're on track, or maybe March, maybe April?
So the deposit typically is going to be that whole pre-construction, more so developing a budget for them, starting with design, and then securing that spot in the schedule where it's like, hey, here's where you are. It's the same thing as before. That's a tough sell for a customer you've never worked for before, right? When you have a customer and I tell you, I don't know when I'm going to be able to start. I don't really know how much your job's going to cost. I need a design in place. Oh yeah, and I need you to pay me money, and you've never worked for me before. Right? That's a tough sell, and initially you don't have the confidence to do that or to say that. But I've gotten to the point where I'm going to do that. And if somebody says no, then okay. But if somebody says yes, then like, yeah, they really want me. And then that essentially, it's like, yeah, this is going to work out. They understand what we do. They've spoken to past customers. I will be able. They're going to be a good customer at that point. And then we have that projected start date. We don't work up the work contract until design is finalized, till we're closer to starting that job. We have that budget, but what we try and do is the same thing as you. When we're working through that budget, I give them an entire spreadsheet of costs, because I don't want anything to be hidden. And a lot of my jobs aren't cost plus, but I want them to see everything, so that when they see their countertop budget and they want to choose something that's more expensive, they understand how that impacts the budget, right? So then when the job is 10% over what they thought, it's not necessarily on me. It's that point. It's like, hey, this is what I have budgeted for your countertops. If you make that selection, that's fine, but it's going to be this much more. Then the ball's in their court and they're spending the money. I'm not making them spend that money. So that's helpful for me. And then as far as kind of keeping up with things, a lot of my customers do follow me on social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram. So they kind of have an idea of how my jobs are progressing and where I am. And my social media is real time. I do post some old jobs every now and then if there's nothing too interesting going on. But then they just check in. It's like, I'll give you an update when I have an update. If you're curious, shoot me an email, call me. I'll give you a heads up as to where we are. And for me, that's helpful as well, because I'm sure, as you know, when you have a boatload of work on your plate and you can't get to it, it's just stress. Mm-hmm. Because it's on your shoulders, it's on your plate all day long. You're stressed out about it. So for me, it's so much easier just to say, hey, listen, I'm hung up 4 weeks on this job right now. And like, that's best case scenario. And I'm truly sorry about this, but you'll see when we get to your job, if I told you it's going to take 12 weeks and it takes 15, I'm not charging you more. It's going to take 15. I'm not going to rush to get out of your house to get to the next customer. So then once I get in, I work for them and they understand that timeline is more so that for them, and I'm not using that timeline to shape our level of work, because if something takes a week longer than possible and I didn't account for it on my end, I'm not the type where I'm going to say, you know what, let's just wrap this up. It's good enough. We'll move on to the next one. We didn't really budget 2 weeks for this. It was more of like a 5-day thing. So customers see that things do take longer. When we run into issues, I'm going to make it right. And then they understand why you have a backlog of work. And if a job goes 2 weeks late and then one goes 4 weeks late, why things get bumped. But again, they understand that hiring me. They understand that I'm not throwing manpower at jobs. So that's something that they're signing up for beforehand.
And I understand that. I mean, just the level of execution and the level of, we'll call it honesty, if you will, but where you're honoring your pricing, even if it takes a little bit longer, because you're going to execute the level you want to for that reputation. But where this is incredibly complex, Tyler, which I'm sure you're dealing with, is remodels in general are very open-ended. You know, you can give a budget, you can give a price. A lot of unknowns. Things are different when you open up walls as you start working, you know, behind the scenes. But in addition to that, here we are, COVID, inflation, material spikes, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that none of us have dealt with in our career in this industry. And so for you having priced something 8 months ago and now it comes time to go, you have a pre-construction agreement. How are you handling that? Because I can assure you some of these things are not priced what they were 8 months ago when it's time to start.
Correct. So again, what you had mentioned about communication and expectations, that's where this comes in and is very, very important. If that's a concern to somebody and they say, hey, you know what, pricing is going up right now, in 9 months, this job may be 30% more, then I think that they should go find somebody who can get this job done sooner than that for them, right? So if I say, hey, we'll do our best, or if it go, I'm just setting myself up for my customers to be disappointed and to put more pressure on myself. So that doesn't make sense. The other thing I do is when I go to sign up for these work contracts, I write a very comprehensive scope of work, and it's work for me. It takes a fair amount of time, but on the scale of projects that I do, it's very doable. So if I do price something and I have a very comprehensive scope of work for that customer to see where all of my thoughts are, how I expect things to be, what I'm accounting for, specifically what I'm not accounting for, and then they see the spreadsheet of costs. If I get into this job and things are different than the scope of work, I don't feel badly charging them a change order. I'm going to have the conversation with them, what we anticipated, what we thought, and where it is now, but that's all in my scope of work. And if I miss something or it was a short sight on my part or my behalf, then I cover that cost. But if it's something, and again, it's always case by case, because it's the whole honesty thing. If something takes a shorter amount of time and then something takes a longer amount of time, I'm not going to pocket the extra money from it being shorter and then slap them with the change order on the back end to kind of double dip into that. I know where I should be, where my profit should be, because it's all so small and it's so transparent that I'll oftentimes say, hey, listen, we ran into this on this job. I didn't anticipate this, but instead of me charging you $3,500 right now for that change order, let's see where this job ends up. If I still get out of here on time, let's just say it's a wash. If I run into something down the road, we'll figure it out and sort it out at that point. But I'm not going to just say, hey, let's thank you. I'm not just going to say, hey, here's a change order, because this is completely different than the scope of work that I had anticipated. But having that very comprehensive scope, it's somebody standing behind me saying, hey, this is what we thought, this is what it is, and the customer can actually see that.
It's interesting. I mean, you can't have it both ways, essentially. Even when you're talking about pricing, you may have a client that, they want you to hold their price, but at the same time, if it goes down in 8 months, they want that lower price, but they don't want to pay the increase. I mean, I understand that from the client perspective, but then from your side, from a management side, you're going to have wins and losses as, each scope is performed. And so you're just going to be transparent with the client, maybe not to a dollar amount, but just say, hey, we have this, but we're going to monitor these other lines as we get forward. And, that communication is really key with the client. And I can see why, they have that vote of confidence bringing you on, Tyler. So do you have employees?
I typically have one at any given time.
So when you say one at any, when you
I
say
try
one at
not
any
to
given
have
time,
more than.
Is there like high turnover, or is it like 1099 stuff? How does that work?
No, so I mean, I have my subs, and then I like to try and keep one person on full time, but it's like I don't last normal than usually a year and a half. Like I've had people work for me for 3 years. It's really tough. In my position, I'm on the job every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't think of anyone. The closest thing would be my wife, because my kids sure as hell not. But there's nobody that I want to spend 10 hours a day with every single day, right? So if it's me on the job. I'm not running jobs. I'm not running around. I'm going to see you for an hour a day, right? You're not a super. I'm going to be working beside you for 8-10 hours. And I don't have a super high tolerance for BS. I'm not the most patient person in the world. I would imagine that I'm not the easiest person to work for. So I've accepted that I'm going to have people come through, spend their time, but it's a lot of it's going to be harder than they anticipate, and the standard there. And I'm I'm not ragging on people, but it's gonna be frustrating when you walk in and you have to be pretty well versed in multiple trades, dealing with the customers, and then executing the way that I want to, and working long hours and everything else, and realistically not making a ton of money. It's our industry and the way that I'm set up, right? It's very difficult to pay somebody $100,000 a year. When you're this small. It's difficult to pay somebody $80,000 a year when you're this small. If I have somebody that I want to pay $100,000 a year and they make me more money than that, that's fine. But most of the people who come in want to learn, and they want to start. They have to start somewhere, and it's not what it looks like on Instagram. It's not the pretty pictures. Especially the houses that we work in. It's all old houses. It's tight. It's a pain in the butt. It's me telling you need to clean up things more. You can't do this. You can't do that. And there's rules and there's standards, and it's not the easiest thing. I can't imagine it would. I wouldn't want to work for me. I'll be honest.
But here's the reality, Tyler. I mean, even though you're super particular and you're very good at execution and you have this high level, so yeah, it would be difficult for someone to come in and execute at the same level, take the same ownership that you do, Tyler. That goes without saying. But the reality is people don't understand enough in our industry how difficult it is. Construction is an extremely difficult industry. It's just hard in every way. And it's funny because when I hired Paul, Paul Lundgren, who's AFT too, he came in, I told him, I said, look, Paul, things look great on Instagram. You see these pretty pictures. And even though I'm not self-performing like Tyler, there's a high level of understanding and execution and managing people, managing clients, right? These are clients spending $5, $6, $10 million on their home that expect certain levels, right? And it was funny because even, his first year, he's like, it's like I'm drinking out of a fire hose. Like, this is no joke. I'm used to cabinetry and trim, but now I'm responsible for everybody and this communication. There's so much more to this that people realize, and even our clients understand what Tyler's doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I would love to have somebody come on where I can sit there and everything that they do is the way that we need it to be done, and I don't have to make them redo stuff. And I don't have to have the conversation like, listen, I really appreciate the effort. This is good, but we kind of need this to be this way, and this is why. It's difficult to have that conversation day in and day out, because of how I want things to line up and how I'm getting paid for that, right? Like, that's what my customers signed up for. So it's got to be difficult for somebody to come in and, they see the finished photos and they see, hey, it was a really great experience with my customers, or I have the best customers in the world. But then they don't realize that you're dealing with an electrician that made a mess, that didn't, do what you needed to do, or you're at the end of the job and the plumber had this mistake, or the customer didn't like the way that the HVAC people did this. It's just headaches all day long. And you're dealing with managing people, you're managing your customers, you're managing your vendors. I'm not in the best mood every day. Like, the happiest I am on a job is when I'm on a job by myself and I have headphones on and I'm just working. And it's not that for the sole reason that I have nothing else to take care of but the task at hand directly in front of me. I get frustrated and I get flustered when something's going wrong. There's a material delay. The subcontractor just bumped for the next day when I just confirmed it with the customer. And then my employee's asking me what they can do. And then I'm just like, everyone leave. I'll get it done by myself. But day to day, it's a tough industry. It's not fun. It's not what it looks like on Instagram. And if you are not getting compensated properly, it's not going to be the easiest thing to live with.
Yeah, it's not. It isn't worth it if you're not compensated for what we do. So how do you find personal time, Tyler? I mean, being that you're self-performing and you have this tight schedule, how often do you travel with the family? With your wife and kids? So
the past 6 months or so, I've really been trying to focus on that, and I found that the smaller I remain, the more time I have, and that's because when I have more stuff going on, if I do go away, I need to be working when I go away. If it's the weekend and I have people working, then I need to be working as well. So the smaller volume of work that I do, the more manageable the projects, the easier it is for me to have personal time, for me not to have to work after work, because I don't have to worry about having 2 weeks worth of work for this person and getting this sub from this job to that job. So I've really been focusing a lot lately on refining what I'm doing, really finding the size projects that maximize the amount of money I make, that it is manageable for me to have people there and not be on the job. And that's really opened up some liberty and some freedom for me to be able to spend some time. The less headaches that I have, the better. And you can ask my wife, I'm not the type when there's an issue to say, oh, I'm going to hang my tool belt up and I'll deal with this tomorrow. If there's an issue or the customer's not happy, that just eats at me nonstop. And it's like, I don't want to leave the job. I want to get back to work and fix it. So the more that I can kind of assuage those issues and minimize how many issues I'm having, the more manageable my personal life is, the more free time that I have. So my decisions to remain small and run a really tight outfit it's as much personal as it is on a business level.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then in closing here, I think what's amazing, Tyler, is you're also as busy as you are, which astounds me how you keep track of everything, being that you're self-performing and manage this and still have time for the family. But in addition, you also run your social media. You also are part of the Modern Craftsman Podcast. So I know it's kind of a two-part question, but what is the benefit of the Modern Craftsman Podcast? How have you seen that affect just you in general, your connections, your network, and even business development, as well as your Instagram?
Obviously getting on and speaking with different people every week kind of opens up your eyes to what other people have going on. A lot of times for me, perspective is huge, right? So you're going through life and you're looking at everything through your own eyes and what you're experiencing and the problems that you have, and being able to get a glimpse into what other people's problems are and what other people's issues are and what they're struggling with. It oftentimes, that perspective enlightens me a lot. It makes me appreciate what I have, what I don't have, how things are structured, and that it could be better, it could be worse, right? So I have an issue at work, and it's one of these doors came in on this cabinet, and it's all banged up, and I need to send it back, and it needs to get refinished, and that's hanging me up for the day, right? I'm bummed about that, and it's one more thing to add to my list. And then I hop on a podcast with John and Nick, and Nick has like something blow off a roof and hit a utility pole and light the utility pole on fire. And I'm like, all right, the door doesn't look so bad, right? Like I can live with that. So that's one aspect of it, selfishly looking inward. But then the other thing, and I'm not one that's going to sit here and take compliments well, or I don't like when I always feel like people are patronizing me, or, hey, I love what you do, or the work that you put out. And it's the same thing with the podcast. When people send me a super long DM telling me how helpful it is, I get real awkward, and I probably don't seem as gracious as I should be, but that's really important for me, is the impact that we have on a larger level. You lose sight of that a lot, right? You're going through the motions and you don't want to record a podcast today. And then you hear from 5-6 people on a Monday morning as to how it changed their work week, or it helped them sort out some issues they were having with a customer or at home. And that's a lot of the motivation to keep doing it. It's not financial impact or anything like that. It comes down to bettering yourself as a person.
Yeah, that's great perspective. That's a great way to close this, Tyler. So for those listening, I mean, what do you have that's upcoming and exciting?
I don't even want to think about it. So honestly, one of my things on my list of stuff to do today, I didn't go to the job today because I have painters on the job. I was like, I'm going to go through my emails with all my return customers and look at what I have on my plate, just so I can tell like new people basically no. So it's the standard projects. It's some kitchens, it's some bathrooms. I have a return customer who just bought a new house and she wants to do a bunch of renovations to it. Some that are pretty easy for me to sub out. Some cabinetry and stuff like that. I don't think that my projects are particularly we don't do anything that's super sexy. I don't think. I think that we do a lot of more traditional architecture and we kind of take a lot of the older homes around here and clean them up, more of a transitional look. But a lot of the jobs coming up are the normal jobs. Try and execute them the best that I can. Make sure our finish work looks tight. But unless I can't think of anything specifically, every job that I do, I feel like I fall in love with. I love the customers. But it'll be more of the same stuff that you always see. I'm not like Nick, where I'm like, I'm going to be doing 3 passive houses and then build a high rise. That kind of stuff doesn't. For me, the growth within the business is more so the evolution of my processes and systems, and hopefully getting to that end goal a little bit quicker and making more money, not necessarily moving up the ladder as far as the size of jobs and the financial dollar behind the jobs.
But the insight you shared, Tyler, is really success comes in so many different forms. And what is the definition of success? And it's different for everybody, right? For you, successful is as you refine those systems, you have a more tight-knit network where you have that flexibility of better style of life and more time with their family or whatever to disengage, and not have the stress and anxiety. And to others that may be being bigger and growing larger with more complex projects. And that, everyone has to understand that. And you've done a great job communicating, understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, and what makes you tick. And that's really why you could stand here today with the confidence you do. So for those listening, to follow along and learn more about you, where could they find you?
Website, trghomeconcepts.com. I don't think that gets updated that much. Instagram, I'm pretty active on. It's just at TRG Home Concepts. You can check us out, the Modern Craftsman Podcast, on that every week with Nick and John. I would say that's about it. I don't think I have too much going on. I mean, I probably have too much going on for one person. But yeah, I think you do. Yeah, like you said, you hit the nail on the head. Honestly, what makes me tick and gets me by, I like to do jobs the right way. I like my customers to be happy. I like to please people, and I do want to simplify my life some. I want to have some free time. I want to have some hobbies. I want to be able to watch my daughters grow up. And for me, it's not about landing the next big job or working 100 hours a week, as much as kind of refining what I'm doing and ensuring that I'm being a good husband, I'm being a good father, I'm being a good business owner, I'm treating my friends the right way, my customers the right way, and being able to hit all of those things without being spread too thin. Those are the goals for me. We'll see what happens.
Well, that's a great way to leave us today, Tyler. So thank you for making time in your busy schedule for us today.
Yeah, man. Thank you.